I call Scott Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Anyone listening to that speech and contribution from the current member for Wigram could be led to believe that the people of Canterbury and Christchurch are up in arms about this piece of legislation. In fact, that is not the case. At first reading, sir, we were promised from that member that there would be tens of thousands of submissions on this bill. We were told that there would be an uprising in Canterbury and across Christchurch on this bill. In fact, what we found when we got to Christchurch, because the Local Government and Environment Select Committee sat in Christchurch, and I want to acknowledge at just this point, Mr Speaker, the gracious hospitality of the Christchurch City Council and the Mayor, the Honourable Leanne Dalziel, who made the Christchurch City Council chambers available for us to hear submissions in. But we heard from only a relatively small number of the 93 individual submissions received. What we heard from was in fact 42 submitters, because of that over 1,000 submissions, more than 1,000 of them were in fact form submissions generated by a third-party email harvesting program sponsored by no lesser than the Labour Party. And so, sir, what did arrive was not a tsunami of opposition. It was measured and it was useful to the committee in our deliberations. What the previous member speaking didn't tell this House, because she wasn't in the Parliament at that stage, but it's well known that the previous Labour government back in early 2008 in fact considered intervening to solve the conundrum that was a completely ineffectual and dysfunctional environment, Canterbury, and that Labour government chose to neglect their duties to the people of Christchurch and Canterbury, and they did nothing. They did nothing. They were scared of what might happen ahead of an election that they were so clearly going to lose, and they did nothing. They abandoned the people of Christchurch and Canterbury when their leadership was most needed. The Labour Party actually forsook their responsibility and left the people of Canterbury in the lurch. And, sir, what happened at our Select Committee was that we worked through this transitional piece of legislation. And as Louise Upston, speaking on behalf of the Minister, said in her speech a few minutes ago, we have come out of that process with, I think, an even improved piece of legislation that we are submitting to the House for second reading today. Sir, ECAN has gone from perhaps the worst performing council to now one of the best. And decisions have been made, progress has been made on all the important water decisions in particular that so affect the people of Christchurch and Canterbury. And what's been more important is that the relationships that were so broken have been renewed, refreshed, and new credibility has arisen from that process. Now, sir, this is a piece of legislation that will take us through a transitional stage from the local government elections to be held later this year through until the next local government elections in 2019. And right and proper as part of this transitional process is that a majority of Canterbury ECAN's councillors will in fact be elected at the election in 2016 later this year. So I think that ECAN has made huge progress in the period of time that the commissioners have been in place, and I think they've done a terrific job. And this is a transition that will mean that that knowledge, that understanding, that credibility that has been built up over the last few years will be maintained through until 2019 when full elections will take place. So one of the matters that the Select Committee did change from first reading was that relating to the nomination of Ngāi Tahu representation. And I want to acknowledge the contribution of my colleague and friend Nukarako, who has, I think, very strongly advocated on behalf of Ngāi Tahu, and they came to the Select Committee seeking 3 nominations. In the original piece of legislation at first reading, the suggestion was that they should nominate 1, and the committee, I think wisely and sensibly, has recommended that they nominate 2. And I was pleased to hear the Minister say that she supported that process when she was speaking earlier on. Sir, This is a very good piece of legislation for the people of Canterbury and Christchurch. It's in fact part of a suite of Canterbury legislation that the Local Government and Environment Committee has been guiding through the House in recent months, and it forms an important part not only of Christchurch's future pre the earthquakes, but post the earthquakes as well, and it's an important part of the building blocks of getting Canterbury back to where it needs to be. Sir, I'm very supportive of this second reading debate. I support the legislation and I commend it to the House.